Hi seniors, this is your teacher model for the lesson on 9-3 and 9-4, so September 3rd and September 4th. And it's going to be for scene 3 and scene 4 of The Streetcar Named Desire on symbolism and commentary. So before we go too far, you're going to need this exit ticket. It says Streetcar Named Desire, scene 3-4, symbolism and commentary. And it says Streetcar Named Desire, exit ticket for scene 3 and scene 4 from the Google Classroom. And you are encouraged to take notes on what symbolism means. So symbols, symbolism, and symbolic meaning. Symbols are an element of the text that have a larger meaning beyond the literal meaning. Symbols are usually objects, but they can also have symbolic meaning in color, in light and dark. Characters can be symbolic, places can be symbolic, and even actions can have symbolic meaning. So one example of symbolism that we've already discussed in class is this idea of the streetcar named Desire. So we know Blanche rode a streetcar named Desire, and that she caught a connection at cemeteries, and then she got off at Elysian Fields, and that's where she met Stella. We know Elysian Fields comes from Greek mythology, and it has to do with this idea of afterlife, and that it passed through cemeteries. So this could be a symbolic representation. We know that the streetcar, there is an actual streetcar line that's actually called Desire, that actually connects to cemeteries, and there is an actual road called Elysian Fields in the real city of New Orleans. So these are real objects, real things, but they could also have a symbolic meaning about how Blanche is dying, or Blanche is being led towards her death by these, quote, desires. So she's making choices, or she's made choices that are leading her towards her doom. There's also a level of opinion in this deeper meaning of symbols. So they're open to interpretation, and they're open to the positive or negative connotations that the reader sees in the symbol. So for example, Elysian Fields can be literally translated to be a kind of heaven in Greek mythology, as opposed to being just about death. Or it could be just about death and the afterlife. Your opinion on what the positive or negative connotation of Elysian Fields is might change your interpretation of the meaning of the symbol as a whole. It's also important to stamp that symbols can add the positive or negative connotations that help you as a reader decide what commentary an author is making about a situation. Remember, commentary, and a special social commentary, is when the author wants to talk about a real life situation or problem and have you pick a side on it. This slide has just a list of some common symbols that exist in A Streetcar Named Desire and are also specifically in scene 3 and in scene 4. These are also copied in your handout. So you can see that in your handout, your box has a list of the symbols that are used. And I'm going to do a quick teacher model with the finding the symbols of The Streetcar Named Desire and this idea of death and how to pull it out into meaning. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to look for evidence in my text. The easiest way to find symbols in a text, the easiest way, is to look for things that get repeated over and over, or things that are shown with a great deal of detail. When we first meet Blanche, she says, and it comes out of nowhere, it's kind of odd, that she took a streetcar named Desire and that transferred to cemeteries and then got off at Elysian Fields. So that's the first time where we see this idea of cemeteries and desire, or that Blanche has traveled to or through a cemetery. And that's on page 9 in the PDF, page 11 in the text. Then we see this association happen again when Blanche meets Stella for the first time, and she starts describing where it is that Stella lives. And she says, "I'm going to be honestly critical about it. Never in my worst dreams could I picture. Only Mr. Edgar Allan Poe could do it justice." So remember, Edgar Allan Poe wrote horror stories. He says that this is like the goal-haunted woodland of Weir, and she laughs. And Stella says, "No, honey, those are the L&N tracks making that noise." So we can see that Blanche makes this association for herself in her own words, that there's some haunting element happening here at this neighborhood. And she associates it with the noise that's coming from the train tracks. And remember, she rode a train to get to where she is. So we see again just the idea that there might be a deeper meaning behind the train tracks and they might symbolize death of some kind. And then when we go down to the bottom, we're having this conversation where Stella and Blanche are talking about why Blanche has come to visit Stella. And Blanche says, "Oh no, I've been given a break from my work." And Stella says, "Oh, I thought maybe you had been fired or resigned." And Blanche says, no, I was on the verge of lunacy almost. So Mr. Graves is the high school superintendent. He suggests I take a leave of absence. So we know that Blanche has been put on basically a mandatory vacation by her boss, and her boss's name is Mr. Graves. So we've got cemeteries, ghosts, and Mr. Graves building up to this association here. We also know that Blanche has been described repeatedly as wearing all white and all white clothing, and she looks like a moth. So that's another important symbol for her. So at this point, we know that Blanche is unhappy about being where she is, so there's kind of a negative association with this idea that her desires have led her to her death. She's scared and uncomfortable, as we see in page 9. She thinks the sound of the train are like ghost shrieks, and the man who fired her from her job's name was Graves. She also dresses in white, which might be ghostly. And she's described as moth-like, which need to survive in the dark, like ghosts. So at that point, I can start making claims about how Blanche, there's a deeper symbolic meaning between the traveling on a train named Desire and being in a place that's associated with death. And if I wanted to pull this out, so I know that this is a bad thing for Blanche, and this is something that's distressing and upsetting for Blanche, and I can turn that into perhaps commentary on Blanche's situation. So giving into desires and passions can be self-destructive, that Blanche has not been realistic or made good choices for her survival in the long run, and that she's seeing the consequences of them now, so that people need to be realistic about choices that benefit them in the long run. And this might be a commentary on survival of the fittest. Blanche will not survive because she's made mistakes. People who don't make good choices also won't survive. And this could be tied into a larger commentary on the kinds of mistakes Blanche makes. We've already seen that she's snobby and that she is a bit prejudiced against people she doesn't consider high class like she is. And that those could be the kinds of poor choices or poor desires that have led Blanche to where she is. For your independent practice, I recommend that you go through scene 3 and you look for symbols that stand out to you. If you want to pick just 3 pages and do a close reading of 3 pages, there's 4 groupings here that each page in this grouping has a symbol on it. Or you could read through the entire chapter and look for the symbols like what's outlined earlier in the PowerPoint, the symbols such as colors, poker game, the light and shadow, Mitch versus Stanley, the radio and the volumes of people's voices, the water in the shower, and the impact of the background music during key moments. Those are all rich for symbolic meaning. After you've decided that, you have an exit ticket. Your exit ticket questions are: what social commentary on gender or society does Williams reveal in scenes 3 and 4? And how does he develop this commentary through literary elements and language? And how does Williams develop a complex conflict between Blanche and Stanley? And how can it be a commentary on society? In order for you to be successful in this exit ticket, you need to write a paragraph response that has the 4 elements of a SEAL paragraph. So remember, a SEAL paragraph, if we go and we look in our PowerPoint, a SEAL paragraph is a paragraph that has a claim, it has 2 pieces of evidence, it explains and analyzes how the evidence supports the claim, and then it links back and makes sure that the question got answered completely. A high-quality SEAL paragraph has a few things that stick out, and I've created an exemplar for you to look at and read on your own time. But you can see I've highlighted each sentence to show what part of this CEAL paragraph it fulfills. I start with my claim, and then I have evidence and then analysis, and then my second piece of evidence, and then I analyze my second piece of evidence. By the end, it should sound almost like I'm repeating my claim again. I've managed to prove my point so thoroughly that I can repeat this and see that this last sentence also counts as a full opinionated answer to the question that was asked. You also have homework for the next time we meet. So the next time we meet, you need to have read scenes 1 through 5, and you need to look for symbolism, commentary, and characterization in those scenes so that you're prepared for class discussions.